Today's video is going to be about unanswered prayers. If you can see on my shirt, it says, remember the days that you prayed for what you have now. When I saw this t-shirt, I took a step back to analyze my life, how it was and what I had prayed for up until that moment. So like, wow, so many things I prayed for weren't answered like instantly, but now I have them over time. And I asked myself, whoa, all of these things are things that sometimes take development, they take change. And then there's times that it seems okay, everything seems to be laid out, why is nothing happening? I do want to go into a discussion on some reasons why that might be. One example is when Daniel in the Bible is trapped and he prays to God, and then he says after he gets rescued, that's my dog. He asks God, like, what took so long? Okay, God explains back to him, the moment that you prayed, I had already responded, but there was things that were going on behind the scenes at that moment. And he even said that the messenger angel at that point, Gabriel, was having to fight against different principalities of darkness, because there was opposition to that prayer that also needs to be overcome. Now we're going to say, yes, God is almighty. Now that we have Jesus Christ, like, we have his full power and the authority through the church. Yes, that is so. But let's also go into some other reasons why prayers take time to be answered, or why they seemingly go unanswered. First one is sin. And, well, I'm a good person. Well, is there someone that you haven't forgiven? There was a time when, like, my brother and I, hey bro, if you're watching this, where we had kind of gotten into a disagreement, and we had gotten very close, but then after that disagreement, we kind of fell apart from each other. We were just very cold to each other. And I was asking for healing in some area of my life, and then I came across this verse, Matthew 5:24. Leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to your brother. Then come and offer your gift. And that just hit me. Like, how could I try to, like, offer my praise unto God when I had, how could I expect forgiveness from God when I hadn't forgiven my brother? That's just like some whole other parable about a man owing money to another man, and then he doesn't forgive another man. And it just becomes a cycle of hypocrisy, and we completely become unaligned whenever we do that. So I reached out to my brother in different ways, like, hey, I forgive you, I love you, bro. But had I kept on holding on to that unforgiveness, it would have just been a major stumbling block in my walk with God, because unforgiveness is, in a way, a sin. Like, it separates you from God. Like, having those nasty emotions, it's everything that the Spirit does not advocate for. Another reason where our prayers may go unanswered is doubt. God is supposed to be almighty. Wow, I should not doubt about what I prepared for this message either. Let me go ahead and pick it up. I want to go ahead and mention that when you have a prayer and you're kind of like on the fence, like, oh, I don't know if he's going to answer it because of this and this, or he answered it before. When you go ahead and do that, there's a term we call in statistics, and also in statistics as well, like psychology, sociology, we call false causation. So if we go ahead and pray for something, but we're not totally on board on thinking that God's going to do it, and something else happens at the same time, we might attribute the effect we want it happening from that unrelated event instead of being from God. That's why with Gideon, when he was trying to assemble the army of Israel, God said, hey, you gotta make your army smaller, you gotta make it smaller. Like, why? Because if you have such a small army and you have a victory, there's no other way than you could say it was God. Like, let's say like you're in a car crash, or you just, there's something major and drastic that you completely avoid, and there's no way it could not have been God. That's when God's strength shines through. It's when you're good and you're like, your money's coming in, you're paying the bills, you're not really seeing God's power, or like the contrast where God's power comes in. I think to drive the point home, I'm going to share James 12, verses 6 through 7. But when you ask, you must believe and not doubt, because the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. That person should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Poetry right there. So when it mentions like tossed by the wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind, it's just something that's just out of control. Like, no. Out of control. But when you have your faith in God, you're anchored. Now, lastly, I do want to mention wrong motive. Sometimes we pray for something where it doesn't truly align with what that person needs, what we need, or what God needs. Like, hey God, help me win the lottery. You know, there's a lot of issues related with the lottery. For example, a lot of the winners don't end up keeping that money, or they have nothing to show for it after a year, or a lot of greed shows up in their family or long lost friends. When you, so I'm going to share James 4:3. When you ask, you do not receive, because you ask with wrong motives, that you may spend what you get on your pleasures. Sometimes the wrong motive doesn't necessarily mean maybe you have something sinister, but it could be like, hey, I want to get this job, that way I can get this really nice car, or you just don't fit into that kind of job. For example, a lot of people want to go into healthcare. But there might be a sense of you have to be very caring, but at the same time be grounded in having yourself empathizing, but at the same time just holding yourself together. You can't just lose control emotionally at the moment that you're rendering care for someone who's in distress. You have to kind of hold it together and also be very caring towards them. For example, some people's like, hey, I'm going to go ahead and be a doctor, be a lawyer. But all of those professions require a lot of time investment and education before doing that. So there might be also a mismatch on what are your needs. For example, do you want a work-life balance? Or what are the things that your life needs versus what you're asking for? God's not going to give it to you. For example, a 5-year-old can ask me for the keys to the car. Not going to happen. Same way, God's also kind of helping us by like, you think you want that, but no, not gonna happen, or at least not now. So when that 5-year-old gets to be maybe 15 or 16 with a driver's permit, all right, let's go out for a spin. So these are 4 reasons it may seem that your prayer is not being unanswered. It's a work in progress. It's developing. Number 3 is sin will be a stumbling block. A very common one would be unforgiveness. Number 2 would be doubt. If it's faith is not only do you believe, but also do you believe this way, but also your belief also lands back at you. It's like what you put in is what you get, not necessarily that way. But if you don't believe it's going to happen, there's no reason necessarily for it to happen. But yes, there are occasions where like people are just down on their knees, they're hit a wall, they're at just rock bottom, and that's when they have nothing to lose. And when they're praying to God with all their heart, that's when we just see God just offer this transformation. I'm sure all of you have had an experience like that where that's where just God shines through, because there is no other explanation other than God saving you from that situation. And lastly, the motive, the timing is right. So I do encourage you to go ahead and read the story of Daniel. And other than that, we'll see each other next week. Bye.